Our tensions have unexpectedly flared between Beijing and Washington, China branding U.S. President Joe Biden ridiculous and provocative for his remarks equating Chinese leader Xi Jinping to a, quote, dictator. Mr. Biden made the comment at a fundraiser in California just a day after his top diplomat had proclaimed progress in stabilizing bilateral relations in a face-to-face discussion with Mr. Xi himself. The U.S. president said Mr. Xi Jinping was embarrassed when an alleged Chinese spy balloon was shot down because he did not know it was there. He said the balloon was blown off course towards American airspace and the Chinese leader did not know what had happened. Not knowing what's going on is, quote, a great embarrassment for dictators, unquote, Mr. Biden told the gathering. The U.S. Air Force downed the suspected spy balloon back in February after it had flown over U.S. airspace. That incident led to Secretary of State Antony Blinken postponing a trip to Beijing. That trip finally took place over the weekend. Mr. Blinken met President Xi on Monday, and the two sides reached a 5-point consensus to boost dialogue, exchanges, and cooperation. And for more, CNA's Lo Min joins us live from Shanghai. Min, very quickly, how has Beijing interpreted the U.S. President Joe Biden's unexpectedly frank remarks?
Mr. Biden's statement was a very inflammatory remark, certainly not the kind of comments you would ever hear from the average Chinese person in public because of the immense risk of personally attacking Mr. Xi. That is why here in China, on state media, the entire episode of Biden's comments and the Chinese Foreign Ministry's response are not published. So the vast majority of the Chinese population are in the dark about this potentially very humiliating episode. Have a listen at what the Foreign Ministry had said.
美方有关言论极其荒谬，极不负责，严重违背基本事实，严重违背外交礼仪，严重侵犯中方政治尊严，是公开的政治挑衅。中方对此强烈不满，坚决反对。
Well, Mr. Biden is fast losing credibility here in China. A leading political scientist at the Fudan University in Shanghai had called Mr. Biden a big mouth and a loose cannon. Remember, this isn't the first time that Biden's unscripted remarks had complicated the U.S.'s relationship with China, and the U.S. State Department has had to either walk back or clarify Biden's comments at least 4 times over the past years, including one of his comments that suggested that Taiwan was independent. So the Chinese Foreign Ministry today was asked by reporters to clarify whether President Xi was truly unaware of the alleged Chinese spy balloons movement, but they did not directly answer the question.
无人飞艇事件的是非曲直是非常清楚的，完全是一起由不可抗力导致的意外偶发事件。 美方本应冷静、理性、专业的处理，但是美方歪曲事实、滥用武力、升级炒作，充分暴露了美方霸权、霸凌的本性。
Min, whatever the upshot to that alleged spy balloon incident, how much of a threat does this remark pose to the progress that both President Xi and Secretary Blinken said they made during Mr. Blinken's recent visit to China?
The important context here is that President Biden was speaking to a domestic audience at a fundraiser event as he gears up for re-election. So the question is whether Beijing is willing to overlook this apparent hostility to understand that the U.S. has 2 very different sets of messages for different audiences, because domestic politics doesn't allow Biden to look weak on China, but at the same time, the U.S. really wants to restore relations with China to prevent competition from veering into conflict. That's why they repeatedly asked China to restart military dialogue and to reopen crisis communication channels. Beijing should understand that well because they face a very similar dilemma here. Analysts are saying that that's why we see China using very tough language on the U.S. because they need to justify to a domestic audience why China is choosing to re-engage with the U.S. Despite months of after months of cold shoulder. But behind the scenes, there is a very good reason for China to not want relations to backslide, not least because it would inject confidence into the economy, but also it would help persuade American allies not to put all their chips in with the U.S. to jointly suppress China. To be clear, the progress made by Blinken's recent trip to Beijing was already very fragile. So this is just another blow to U.S.-China relations. But the question is whether both sides can really cut through the noise to go back to honor that very hard-won consensus that was reached behind closed doors to continue to try to stabilize relations.
Oh, thanks for that. Lo Min Min speaking to us live from Shanghai.